Okay. Well then, okay. What are my other options here?
All right, Jeff, we are live.
All right, Jeff, we are live.
Great. But can you see me?
Welcome, everybody.
Welcome, everybody.
Going through a little bit of technical difficulty. Our first one of these setups.
Appreciate everyone's patience.
Your background looks
very better.
What's that? Oh, it is. It's the only not clean spot. I'm in the office and we're moving everything around. Maybe in a future Hangout we can show everybody our ridiculous server racks. They don't make a very good pillow.
Well, while I'm trying to get Jennifer hooked up, some of these questions could be answered by you.
Sure. I have my own questions for Jennifer, so when she shows up, she's going to get bombarded.
Jonathan Gibson had several questions.
Do you think Gibson is his real last name?
You know, it depends if he's old enough for it not to be.
Okay, what is What does Mr. Gibson have to say?
Well, one of the things Jonathan asked was if he could see the server rack.
If he could see the server rack?
Yeah. But
I don't know.
By what year do you think cybersecurity will become a bigger thing?
Will become a what?
A bigger thing. It wasn't even spoken of by the government until 2009. When countries like Japan are looking to hire 80,000 cybersec consultants. So what's the forecast of jobs?
Well, it's full employment. It's full employment for cyber, as far as I can tell, from the corporate and U.S. government standpoint, for years to come, probably 3 or 4 years at least. I believe Cyber Command and NSA is trying to hire about 10,000 plus. I know U.S. DHS is trying to hire in the thousands. I know Air Force, everybody's trying to hire. What the bigger question is, how are we going to get them? Instead of just everybody eating each other and cannibalizing the workforce, we need everything from career ladders that are easily explained. So part of the problem they're having is you get into, say, let's say DHS in cyber, it's really unclear what you're going to do with your career, what level you are, what your duties are. I mean, your duties are clear, but I guess what I mean is in other careers, you know your promotion ladder, you know what your performance, what you're reviewed on. And in some government positions, it's a little unclear. The NSA has been doing it for almost 60 years, so the NSA is very sophisticated. They have training budgets. They know where you sit in the career ladder. They know where you are. They move you around. They expose you to new things. They don't just sit you at a console and say, you're a malware analyst for now and forever. And I think a lot of other agencies need to figure out how they're going to keep the workforce vitalized. Otherwise, they rotate out after a while after getting burned out. On the other side, you have all these defense contractors trying to fill these spots. And that's created this tension also of defense contractor or contractor versus FTE, full-time employee. And that's just the government. In commercial sector, everybody's hiring now. And so my back of the thumb calculation says full employment for a long time. And what you see is people with security skills doing more than just security. When I talk to people now what they do with security, a lot of them want to go do law. They want to do business. They want to do advisory work. They want to use it in their engineering. They want to use it in their normal software development job. So even if we start producing more security people, they're not going to stay in security. They're going to go do other things. And so that knowledge is going to start to diffuse out into the workforce. And I think that's a good and healthy thing. It just means we're going to have less dedicated bodies on security, but a larger, more general workforce knowledgeable in security. Let me see if I can show you the rack a little bit more here behind me.
Now, which rack is this? This is rack A5.
These were shock-mounted rack mounts used by FEMA, and so they're tempest shielded and hardened, which means it's really hard to actually get computers to work in them. But when you do, they're pretty impervious, which is kind of cool.
We got the question. What do you think about the sheer number of corporations that refuse to do anything about known security?
They refuse to do anything about what kind of security?
Known security issues.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm fascinated by the companies who are complaining about, well, both sides. They're complaining about national security letters, but don't actually improve the security of their products. Or they complain about this as an intrusion, but they've specifically engineered the products to make them easily tappable and specifically engineered their products to easily gather the information that people would want. And then they wonder why people want the data. It's very hypocritical. It seems like if you design your product from the ground up to not be easy to monitor, you've got a defense. If you build it and it happens to be built in a way that's very simple to monitor, then you can't argue to the government or anybody else that it's hard to do and we shouldn't do it. You can be easily compelled to just turn on that extra logging feature. So I think companies like Silent Circle who've thought about it, they specifically don't log anything, and they've built everything not to generate logs. And it makes engineering more difficult and troubleshooting more difficult. But then, if they're ever asked by a court to turn on logging, they can honestly say, no, we can't do that without a giant rewrite. These other companies that are, they kind of want their cake. I get the feeling that we're in a period where the corporate behemoths are starting to wake to these issues, but they don't fully understand them yet. So that's why we're seeing all these kind of random signals, random behaviors, where they're starting to pick up and reflect the mood of the public, but it's not actually reflected in their culture or maybe in their software design yet. So So how come I don't see your face here? You're the puppet master. Uh-oh. There you are. Dun, dun, dun. Almost with a green screen behind you. But in doing so, it has muted you, so I cannot hear you at all. I can just see you.
All right, there's the angle's a little
The
weird.
angle's a little weird.
Okay. There you are. I can hear you now. Well, let's do some more questions and call it quits if we can't get Jennifer on, and we'll just reschedule it with Jennifer.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have an accurate
Do we have an
timeline
accurate timeline
for when the NSA's
for when the
Maryland
NSA's
super
Maryland
data centers
super
will be
data
operational?
centers will be operational?
Has this been
Has
successfully
this been
grown at all?
successfully grown at all?
The ones in the expansion in Fort Meade?
I think that one
I think that one and the
Oh. From what I know, just reading public reports, the data center in Utah, they're turning it on when it's ready, and they're having problems with power. I think the last article I read was a few months ago. They just had build problems, and things were catching fire, and too much power was being consumed. So, I mean, my understanding is part of it's operational, and then they add new capacity when it's ready. So I couldn't tell you when it's going to be fully when the battle station will be fully operational, but it'll probably be operational shortly, I would guess.
Well, but in regards
to
the public
the
campaign
public campaign
to try to the Utah data center by denying it water and such.
Yeah. I don't think you get to stop the data center unless you convince Dianne Feinstein in California. You know, act of Congress kind of stuff to prevent that. You know, the notion that we're going to stop, that the NSA is going to stop collecting metadata and then the phone companies are going to collect it all and then turn it over as necessary is kind of, that's very worrying to me because I trust the government a little bit more than I trust the phone companies not to try to figure out how to monetize that data in some other way. You know, the government wasn't trying to also sell me things. They were maybe interested in what I was doing, just like the phone company, but at least they weren't trying to monetize it all, where I kind of see the worst of both worlds if the commercial companies get to sit on all that data.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because there's all that data, and then they're going to be open to that, you know, camel's nose under the tent. Everybody's going to start asking them for data because there it is. It's what would you call it? If Jennifer was here, I'd say, is it an attractive nuisance?
And I think she would say that it is. Jonathan Gibson says that his name is Gibson. And he also had follow-up question. When will governments offer opportunities for hackers?
I think they already do, but it's in their own sort of constrained way. So, for example, the hiring process pretty much excludes anybody that's ever smoked pot. And I've heard from people in the FBI and other agencies say that that pretty much wipes out over 50% of the people they want to hire. They get into interview processes, they're all excited to hire people, and then they have to bump them all out. And so it makes their hiring very difficult. And then by the time the people's, just picking marijuana for example, 5 years later of no smoking, well, now those people are older and they have already found other jobs and careers, so now they've lost the opportunity to go to the FBI because they're off doing their normal thing now. So it really hurts them because they can't get people when they need them early on in their career. And now with certain states, Colorado and Washington, legalizing marijuana, they're going to have some real hiring problems, I believe. So it's going to force, those laws are going to have secondary impacts on forcing them, I think, to refine their hiring criteria. So that's more of like a law enforcement opportunity. But also in government, I think you're starting to see a recognition that these skills are really important, and you can't just outsource it all to the civilian world. Like you saw what happened with the healthcare.gov, 100% outsourced with very little management oversight that had the skills necessary to know if the program was on track. And when I talk to people in government, it seems like there's this tension, there's this dichotomy. Government wants to have all the skill, and they're starting to realize they don't or they can't for whatever the market force reasons. And so that tells me they need then to have the management skill. If you can't have the talent, but you have to buy the talent, that means you got to learn how to manage the talent. And I think there's not enough skilled program managers that will know how to manage a cybersecurity or a cyber program to get the most and the best out of the contractor. So we're at this tipping point now where they don't have quite all the skill necessary to build it, so they're going to buy it. And now they've got to figure out what skills they need to actually manage and oversight the civilian workforce. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's really kind of chaotic right now. But you know, from market theory, when there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of opportunity, right? So now is the time to sort of act in the next couple of years. When everything gets solid and settled down and everybody has to have 5 different diplomas and 3 different certifications, that's when things are going to be kind of atrophied. Right now, when it's very dynamic and there's a lot of action, I think that's your opportunity. Less stability, but more opportunity.
So there was
more
sensationalism than truth in the rash of headlines recently about how the government was considering hiring stoners because they just couldn't find qualified people who didn't have questionable backgrounds in that area.
So, I mean, I didn't read that article, so I can't comment on it specifically, but I know some of the thinking in some of the agencies is that you can't attract and retain skillful enough, say, just for example, security folks. Maybe you can for engineers, but in the security area, it's hard to attract and retain them for long term. So the thinking is starting to shift to how do we bring them into government, keep them around for a few years, 3, 4 years. They learn the problems of government, they learn the challenges, and then they rotate out and they go to, say, the private sector. But now that they know what's going on in government, maybe they build a better product for us. Maybe they build a new consulting service. Maybe they, by knowing the challenges in government, maybe that helps the private sector. And then maybe 4 or 5 years later, they rotate back into government. And so instead of thinking that you're going to hire these guys and it's going to be a career for life, they're starting to realize maybe realistically you have to build an environment where they'll come in for a while, rotate out, come back in. And so in order to do that, you're going to have to offer these guys something interesting. Access to interesting information, a security clearance, working on a large problem that they wouldn't ever be able to work on in the private sector unless they had way more seniority. So they're trying to be creative, but this is happening at government speed. So that's a polite way of saying that it's going to take a while. Yeah. But I'd say certain agencies are much more dynamic than others, just historically. So, you know, if you know where you want to go, don't take what's happening at one agency to be what's happening at all of them. They're all miniature universes, all with their own different politics and their own different. And the world's not made up of just the federal government. You know, state and locals are actually where a lot of the really important work is to be done. And so you can just start at home. You know, build your resume there. You don't have to start right at the biggest, sexiest job. If you're interested, you can volunteer. Try to work state and local. They're even more desperate for skill a lot of times.
Haidar from Turkey wants to know if you've ever been in prison.
I have been in a prison. I have never been an inmate in prison.
I feel like that satisfactorily answers that question.
Yeah, I would not wish to spend time in a prison, especially a Turkish prison. They have, I think, the highest percentage of reporters in jail of any country. So I would not want to be a reporter in Turkey.
Dave Itel says totally management is not a solved problem. If you look at the job ads, you see lots of low-level or technical jobs. No management ads.
Exactly. They're burning out the talent, I believe, and they rotate out and they get hired away by all the contractors. Well, Dave knows this. You know, you build up some talent, you build up some insight into what's going on in an agency, and then the contractors come along and offer you a better job for twice the money in less hours. So of course you take it. And that puts the government in a terrible position because now they've got to pay more money for the thing that they were just having done by the full-time employee. So that puts them in this vicious circle. In the conversations I've heard is, how do we break that circle? And one of the solutions that's been talked about is, don't let the contractors do the really cool stuff. Reserve that for the full-time employees. So the full-time employees get to maybe do the most interesting work and get the contractors to do the more mundane or repetitive work. Is one option to try to attract talent into the interesting problem. So I mean, we'll see if that works, but refreshing to see that they've acknowledged, some agencies have acknowledged that problem. Now, they can do anything about it is a whole nother thing. The joke in Washington, D.C. is that they're fantastic at admiring the problem. They're like professional problem admirers. They can tell you all about the problem, the color, why it exists, who's involved, how long it's been around. And then when you say, okay, so then what do we do? You've got a whole long list of reasons why you can't do anything. It's like you're sort of hostage. And, it can be stifling sometimes. The time horizons for a solution are glacial. And so it's like, well, not this president, next administration, probably the first term. And you're running that through your head, and you're like, so we might get movement in 5 years? I don't want to wait around 5 years to see movement on just one thing. I want to go somewhere and get something done. And so you can see why people rotate out. Did we ever get Jennifer on here?
No, we're still battling through that.
Okay. Well, let's give it about another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll just reschedule it. And next time we will have twice the power.
Absolutely. The shakedown cruise will have been survived.
Yeah.
Oh, hey!
Whoa!
Whoa! Yay!
Dun, 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 dun.
I'm sorry. I'm sure it's my fault.
No, it took me 10 minutes to figure this thing out.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now we have 2 minutes left. Yeah. I need a better microphone. So, I have this list of questions, but we only have 2 minutes. So you're going to have to speak really fast.
Okay, or I'll just talk until most people leave. That's better.
Cool. Okay, so we're just going to jump in, and there's been a lot of writing, and you've written some articles on the U.S. Supreme Court case on Davis, and how all the recent rulings relate back to the previous rulings, Fourth Amendment, third-party doctrine. So why don't you just give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, it's been an amazing week for the Fourth Amendment. I'm gonna myself or something. So a couple of billion. There was the 11th Circuit, which is on cell phone tracking. And the issue there that made that so interesting is that it involved historical stored data, which is the very kind of that the government covered by Supreme Court precedent, which says there's no Fourth Amendment expectation of privacy. I'm gonna hold on. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. And I still hear myself. Sorry. Not sure why. It's like I think this is a Google problem. So it makes a really big difference. A lot of the government surveillance programs are based on this idea that information by third parties is not protected by the Fourth Amendment, so they don't have to go and get a warrant for it. And for most of these programs, if they did have to get a warrant for it, they wouldn't be able to collect the information the way they do because they're collecting it in bulk. And you can't get a regular warrant for information to be collected in bulk.
Because that's the concept of the minimization.
No, it's actually about the warrant must specifically name the place to be searched and the things to be seen. It's sort of a function of the warrant is that you have to have probable things and they have to be identified. So you can't really have a warrant that says we're going to collect everybody's phone numbers in case there's some information for fighting terrorism. It's just not something a warrant can do.
But they don't ever argue that do they ever argue that they need to change the way warrants are created?
No, because the process is basically set by the Constitution. Now, if we end up having a situation where the Fourth Amendment and results in a lack of bulk collection, maybe you'll see some pressure there, but we've never had that. And there's been two other cases actually for the past 2 weeks that have been awesome for the Fourth Amendment. There was yesterday's or 2 days ago a Supreme Court case of Riley, which says there's no warrant to search people's cell phones when they're arrested, and you can extend that to computers, tablets, or that sort of thing. And there was a very interesting Second Circuit about a week or two before this. Hold on to data that is not responsive when you have a warrant. And that's really computer searches. The government will almost always go overseas. They mirror the hard drive, they take it back to the lab, and then they search through for whatever information is about the crime they're supposed to be investigating. What happens with the rest of that information? Well, they keep it. And they use it, whenever. And what the Second Circuit said is, not only can't you keep it forever, but you also can't keep it and then get a search warrant later on to search that data subsequently. So we've had 3. One is the Supreme Court. Obviously, that's a big deal. But we've had 3 very big, very interesting Fourth Amendment cases in the past 2 weeks. Also, the sound got better, so whatever you just did there worked. So now I can't hear you, Jeff. But that's fine. I can keep talking about the Fourth Amendment.
You can hear me.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. So we got a question from Carl last night on Facebook, and he said this is based on the Supreme Court ruling. So what is the impact for, say, border searches? And the reason he brings up the border search is because part of the quote was from one of the justices was that a cell phone search would typically expose the government to far more than the most exhaustive search of a house. So the justice is equating the phone search to be more complete than the house search. So then what does that mean for a search on the border or near the border?
Yeah. Great question. I was having this argument with a friend just the other day. I think it will impact the border search. So border search exception to the warrant requirement is a different exception. It's based on the idea that the government has plenary power at the border to prevent things from coming in and out. And generally you need nothing at the border to do a search unless the search is particularly invasive. And this was like a strip search. And the courts have said with strip search, they need to have reasonable suspicion. You don't have to go and get a warrant for each person, but you actually have some reason to believe that the person is carrying contraband in a way that makes it justifiable to strip them down. And we have argued in the past that computer searches at the border are so invasive that they are more like strip searches than they are like just looking through your luggage, and the courts have not been super responsive to that. But all of this language in Riley, the cell phone case, goes to that point that the search of your phone or your computer is as invasive, if not more so, than the search of the home, which is like a church under the Fourth Amendment. It is the canonical, most private part that the Fourth Amendment protects. So I think that this case gives us great precedent and great way to argue that you need reasonable suspicion to search computers at the border. Certainly to mirror and take the data later on and to do a more investigative search. So it's this case, I think, like the Jones GPS case, is going to be cited a lot. It is not a narrow ruling. It says a lot of really important stuff, and it's going to be relevant to every single digital search case that happens from now into the future.
That was my next question is, so we don't really know like the damages. I mean, how do you implement this? Are we going to have to wait for like perfect follow-on cases to get specific implementation guidance, or does attorneys general all over the country read this and go, oh my God, I've got to change my ways?
Governments are changing their policies right now, from states to federal government, because they have some guidance now. So for example, in the cell phone case in the 11th Circuit, no judge and no prosecutor in the 11th Circuit right now is going and getting phone location data, whether stored or in real time, without getting a search warrant now. Because they know that if they do otherwise, that information is going to be suppressed in their future cases. Similarly, I think in the Second Circuit, FBI offices with cases there and labs are starting to say, hey, do we have computerized data just sitting around? Because if we do, maybe we need to be deleting this. And I hope that defendants and defense attorneys have started to file motions saying, you've got to be deleting this information. If you have any information about me from my old case, you've got to delete it. And then similarly in the Riley case with the cell phone searches, the FBI right now is thinking about, okay, what guidance do we give our police officers? Local stations are also saying, what guidance do we give our police officers for what they should do when they arrest somebody and they've got a cell phone on them? I suspect there's going to be a huge run on Faraday bags, because now that they can't filter through your phone right now, in order to preserve the evidence on the phone, they're going to have to slide it into a Faraday bag. So I suspect they're loading up on those, and they become a new thing that police officers carry around with them in the police cars. I'll just tell you a funny story for those who don't know. When Jones came out in 2012, that case was a Supreme Court case that said police can't put GPS trackers on your car because it violates your privacy interest in the car. And the FBI General Counsel told us that the day that ruling came out, they had to shut off all of the GPS trackers they had around the country. And I can't remember now whether he said there was 3,000 or I think there was 3,000. And then what they had to do was go to a court in every district and get a warrant to allow them to, at the very least, turn the GPS tracker back on so they could go find it and retrieve it from the car, because they cost a couple $100s of taxpayer money each, and they didn't want them to just be out there. So, these cases, when they come down, law enforcement responds immediately. And I will be very interested to see whether the national security establishment, whether judges on the FISA court or NSA lawyers, also start to rethink the surveillance that they're doing in light of these precedents that are occurring in the law enforcement context but are nevertheless constitutional.
Yeah, because it seems like the FBI is a big actor in a lot of this, and they don't ever get really mentioned. It's always the NSA that's kind of called to task. But a lot of what their authorities, it's all being exercised through the FBI. So It seems like if you want to change, really you should be going after the FBI on these issues and pressuring them to clarify things versus the NSA.
They're all the government, so it's all the government. And more people's lives are going to be adversely affected. More Americans' lives are going to be adversely affected by encounters with FBI agents or local police officers than by encounters with intelligence agents. But nevertheless, the Constitution is a floor, and it applies to law enforcement and to national security as well. Now, it may apply differently in those contexts, but it does apply differently. And these cases, will affect law enforcement policy immediately.
So that was my two other questions. One then is, so why now? I mean, why is the court woken up to this? Can we attribute it to Manning and Snowden, or is it just a boiling up and it's the ripe, that the cases are ripe, or just a confluence of events?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that obviously you can't know, but I think it's a confluence of events. I think it's a combination of the Snowden revelations. I think it's these cases have been percolating up. I think that justices are getting more experience with these technologies and understanding more how these affect people's everyday lives. I think that academic work, for the academic work has gotten better on this issue and has surfaced in better and better ways and clearer forms what the interests are, what the privacy challenges are, why these cases should be looked at differently from like just just numbers you dial or a police officer following you on the street. And so it's all those things together. I mean, this was a great week for those of us who are civil libertarians, and so I feel very optimistic right now. It's one of those things, though, if you look at any other big civil rights issue, what was the tipping point? Like in California, a few years back, we voted for Proposition 8, which banned gay marriage. Today, those are overturned, and more than 60% of California's voters approve of marriage equality. It happened in an unbelievably short period of time. What was the tipping point? I don't know. If you looked at the Fourth Amendment 3 years ago, there were some, dark and scary things to be afraid of. 3 years later, it seems like all the way up to the Supreme Court, judges are finally realizing that technology makes a difference and that it's dumb to try to answer these questions by saying, oh, an email's like a letter, and cell phone tracking is like when a police officer follows you on the street, and looking in your phone when you're arrested is like looking in a cigarette pack in your jeans pocket. And what made that change? I think all of those things together.
I also wouldn't discount the power of clerks, because a lot of these clerks now are very tech savvy, and they've grown up with tech, and they're clerking, and they're working in these law firms, and they're working in these courthouses, and so.
Absolutely.
My second question, which I've now completely forgotten, was what are the follow-on suits? So if this is the beginning, what's next? Or what are people like you that follow this for a living? What are the next battles? Where's the next front in the war? And on Fourth Amendment third-party doctrine, because I keep advising people that you don't have control over your data when you house it, say, in the cloud. You have no expectation of privacy. You don't control it anymore. Is that changing? Is my advice going to have to change?
Yeah, I think that we are headed to a different world where, the third-party doctrine, to the extent that the government's version of it was ever correct under existing Supreme Court precedent, is now being really rolled back. And I think that we are regaining some balance here where expectation of privacy, the thing that triggers Fourth Amendment constitutional protection, is no longer co-equal with secrecy. That you can have something that's not totally secret. Maybe Facebook has it, maybe Dropbox has it, maybe the phone company has it, and it can still be protected by the Fourth Amendment. Now, that means that if that's true, it means that they need to get a warrant for it, especially if it, depends. And obviously, if you post something on Facebook that's public, people are going to see it and everything. So there's always going to be a place for cloud encryption, and certainly for in-transit encryption. That will be more true depending upon how worried you are about national security surveillance and information collection that takes place overseas, where maybe the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply, and that sort of thing. So, but I think for more run-of-the-mill everyday stuff, regular people will be, we may well be moving towards where regular people have a Fourth Amendment expectation, even for information that's stored in the cloud. So what's next? Third-party doctrine, border search, like you said. I think, sort of spreading these doctrines to other circuits, location privacy more broadly, narrowing the scope of search warrants so that you don't have this like, super big collection and then just a free-for-all for how you use the information afterwards. Fourth Amendment's always really operated at the point of collection and not really so much use, and that's beginning to change. So it's really a brave new world out there in terms of the law finally beginning to catch up to what people are doing with the technology.
So I followed Second Amendment cases for quite a while, and then I got busy and stopped, but it was always like nobody wanted to litigate a Second Amendment case up to the Supreme Court because both sides were terrified of what would happen in a ruling, right? It might go for you, it might go against you, but once the Supreme Court rules, it's all over. So now we've got a Supreme Court ruling on the first, it seems like, in a while. So are both sides now going to be, one side's going to go aggressive and the other's going to be very leery and not, they're going to try to settle out of court, or they're going to try to drop the case before it gets to the Supreme Court? How do the tactics change now that we have a definitive answer?
Yeah. Well, one of the things about the Fourth Amendment, which is different from in other cases, is that in the Fourth Amendment, it's always the government, and on the other side is hundreds of millions of people who are charged with crimes. So, the government is the only one who really can be, cautious or whatever. The defendant is going to go for it because they're the ones who are going to prison and they have nothing to lose. They're not interested necessarily in strategizing the proper development of the law. So that puts the government in a position of deciding which cases to fight and which cases not to fight, and they have exercised that and been judicious about that in the context of cell phone tracking, am I there? Yeah, cell phone tracking, other collecting information. They all just drop cases, and they do that, when they don't need the evidence, or the thing that the person is being charged with is maybe not that big of a deal. But there will be cases where the government will be caught between pushing an advanced or a novel theory of the Fourth Amendment, maybe they're not so comfortable with, and letting like a murderer go free. So I think we just see a lot more Fourth Amendment litigation than we do for almost any other legal doctrine.
You don't have to prove harm then.
Right.
That's convenient.
All you have to show is that the evidence was used against you in the trial.
And not necessarily that it was a determinant factor, just it could have been contributory.
You usually, they may not overturn your conviction then, but you've got other stuff you're arguing too, and you're trying to argue that in aggregate you wouldn't have been convicted but for this evidence.
Okay, well, we've got do you have a couple minutes? We'll take some questions from...
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I can't tell if anybody's still on here. It's just us having a conversation. But let's see, Darrington, do we have any questions? He's probably muted.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay, we can hear you.
Pardon me, I'm looking through the questions.
If we mute Jeff, then we don't hear that. Echo.
Yeah. Mute me.
Happily. Okay. Sorry about that delay there. One of the nice things about Google is that they don't let you do those things at the same time. Muting Jeff and reading questions. Will Detmering asks, most of the rulings are for individual rights, but are commercial and educational organizations, do they have any recent privacy rulings?
So so organizations have Fourth Amendment rights, although they don't have Fifth Amendment rights. So, for example, the ACLU office, the ACLU has Fourth Amendment rights. So what applies for an individual applies for them too.
Okay, I think that's about all the questions that we have in the lineup. We have, there are still people watching, and I want to thank them for bearing through our technical difficulties in this inaugural version of our limited hangout. I promise we will learn our lessons from this and be much smoother next time.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
And Jennifer, thanks for joining us and sharing your expertise. Hopefully we'll be able to invite you again sometime.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.